Listen, AI is not going to take your job. People using AI will take your job. So that's the shift. Can't describe what you're doing as a process. You don't know what you're doing. Been really paying a lot of attention to digital transformation. One of my jobs back in 2001, in God we trust. All others bring data.
Welcome to another episode of the Quiet Work podcast. Today, we are going to talk about operations, solving your toughest operations headaches. I'm bringing in an expert in that matter. Ron, please introduce yourself and the company you represent, actually your meta ecosystem that you've developed over the years to the audience. We'll start the conversation with that.
All right, cool. So my name's Ron Crabtree. I'm the founder and CEO of MetaOps and MetaExperts. We actually founded in 2002, and I'll tell more of the story when you're ready. But I first had a 20 plus year supply career in the supply chain and materials management and operations, and then moved into management consulting, and then ultimately started our company up 24 years ago.
If you could look back, what has changed over each decade maybe? Are there any time stamps that you have in your mind that you know that was a huge shift in the industry, and then another huge shift maybe 5 or 10 years later when you look back?
Oh, golly, that's a great question. There's different shifts have happened. So, I started working, kind of right out of high school in 1974 and ended up, got married when I was 19. We moved to California back in 1978, and everything was paper and pencil in those days, right? Computers were a dream. And I ended up working for Disney, the manufacturing division of Disney. And I hired in at just the right time. This was in Southern California. They had the studios in Burbank, and then down the road in Glendale, they had the big site, with the manufacturing design center, WED and Maple. We started using computers in 1978 to do program evaluation review technique, which is a very fancy critical path method scheduling technique that you need computers to do, because it's a very, very powerful software for a complex project to identify not one, but the three critical chains. So you can understand and manage the critical activities that are going to limit being on time, at budget, et cetera, for projects. Geez, I'm thinking 1979, we would sit around all day and, mark up green bar reports and Gantt charts, and we'd hand it off to a data center group. They'd type all that up, and they would squirt the data via modem to a super cray computer in Philadelphia. It would crank all the PERT algorithms, squirt the data back by modem overnight to, the local computers they had, and then they dump out all these reports. So we had a 24-hour rinse and repeat process, not unlike ERP systems, enterprise resource planning systems, which were in action in those days. But for its time, it was kind of bleeding edge. So that was the big shift, as you move to the use of computers for the everyday operations of the business, trickling down to, people at my level, because I was a planner. I was, ended up being a leader of a group of 6 planners, doing capacity constrained planning for all the resources to build equipment for Epcot and Tokyo Disneyland. But that was kind of like a big shift, right around 1975, 1985 timeframe. And ended up moving back to Michigan and then working for automotive suppliers. ERP systems, really began to make a difference. Lean manufacturing really began to be known and acknowledged back in the late 80s and going into the 90s. But there was also a technology track to that. And I remember distinctly another pivot point as we got toward the end of the 1990s, we'd have that I2K bubble, right? So Matt, you were probably too young to remember that, but we had this huge problem, right? Because all the computer stuff that had been developed up to that point had this problem, right? They didn't think about the year 2000. So a lot of computer systems didn't have the ability to actually work with data. It's very complex. So we had to all beat the Y2K bug, and that was supposed to be the end of the world for those who were living those days. But of course, that didn't happen. And then I remember moving into consulting with Grant Thornton back in 1998, and that's when the internet actually started to be well known and well used. So the use of the internet was that next big pivot from a technology perspective, and organizations began to recognize that there was a real opportunity there, not only on the sales side, but also from data access and information. I remember using social media and trying to do marketing and sales for one of the consulting companies I was working for, a lean manufacturing consulting company back in
then already?
2001.
Wow. No idea that it existed back then.
Yeah, and then and then we fast forward, and nobody can miss. I've been really paying a lot of attention to digital transformation. One of my jobs back in 2001, when I was last working for a large management consulting company, was I was a senior manager, but my specific job was to identify the technologies that lean manufacturing or operational excellence focused organizations is that which technologies would actually be the best ones to partner up with to enable organizations to leapfrog and gain big gains, right? Be a lot more competitive, whatever that means. And so that was my job. So I've always had a very keen interest in this whole topic of digital transformation and how that happens. Nobody can miss, AI is the big thing in the news today. So back in 2020, International online learning organization came to me and said, look, we need an all new digital transformation awareness program. So I reached out to my MetaExperts network, which I may talk about more later, and I pulled in several experts that had different sorts of expertise around applying technologies. And we came up with a list of all the different things to consider in digital transformation. In 2020, that was more than 30 different buckets of technologies. AI was just one of them. Edge sensor technologies, big data, robotic process automation, visualization and digitization tools for training, just the list went on and on. And we built out 5 functional courses around which technologies most impacted sales, marketing, product development, which most impacted supply chain, which most impacted HR, managing people, change management, which impacted internal finance and IT operations, and then finally quality, right? Operations and quality, things like that. And we flipped it on its side and created 4 industry courses, one specifically for manufacturing, another for fintech or financial services types of organizations, one for healthcare, medical providers in particular, and a final course around service providers and government and things like that. Fast forward, today they're Gartner Magic Quadrant globally for digital transformation awareness. So I've had a really keen eye for that. So you can't be alive and working in business and not be hearing about AI. My caution to all leaders is be careful. AI is one of many things you need to consider if we're thinking about digitization and leveraging that to improve how our business performs. Get this, with AI, there's more than 25 different kinds of AI. For example, we think about using agents to do various tasks within processes. There's many different kinds of agents, and you'll pick different sorts of tools depending on the type of problem that you're actually solving for. So that's been the big shift here in the last 4 or 5 years, is this coming to recognition that, the application of technology, AI being an important piece of that, has exploded and not going away.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for sharing on your experience. I always love to zoom out and hear from someone's perspective, direct perspective that lived through these shifts. When you mentioned digitalization, it brought memories to me when I arrived in the United States, joined a company where we had around the time maybe 15 to 20 employees in the team, and a person brought a big book with SOPs written on top of it. This person's goal was to essentially have us, and this was 10 years ago, something around 10 years ago, so before the big AI shift. But this person had an intention to have all of our team that was rapidly growing, we were hiring fast, to use that manual that was probably 500 pages of SOPs. So first, that person wanted to spend 3 months or probably longer than 3 months to build those SOPs following the manual, the manuscript, I should say, and then have everyone else follow this. Everyone who comes on board would study it and follow it. So that didn't work well, obviously, but that brought memories when you mentioned digitalization being a big aspect. And I know that some companies, especially companies with a longer history, are more hesitant to essentially at the adaptation time. They may be afraid of the adaptation time that might take too long, or maybe it's going to crush some of the processes that they've already have in place. So I'd be curious to hear later on from you how you were able to convince them essentially to do that and follow that path. But tell us about the origin, 2022 origin of your meta ecosystem. I like to call it meta ecosystem because the name is proper and means something beyond, something next, something higher level. So would be curious to hear about the inception of your company and what led you to start your own consulting company and provide services.
Yeah, it was serendipitous starting my company. I was working for a large management consulting company. This is back in 2001. And we were doing some massive lean implementation projects for Ford Motor Company. And then there was a little falling out with Ford. So they decided they were not going to use the outside consultants anymore. So that led to a layoff. And so I was in the process of interviewing. I was supposed to fly to Houston on then September 13th, 2001 for the final interview, to go to work with another big consulting company. And
Well,
911. Nobody was going anywhere. And
yeah.
so I pivoted, and I had friends and connections. One of the guys I used to work for, who was a plant manager at United Technologies Automotive, had started up a consulting practice, and he needed help. So I started doing freelance consulting and, with Larry in 2001, I should say. And, with 6 months later, the company came back to me, wanted to hire me, and like, well, what are you going to pay me? And they told me, I said, well, I'm making more than that as an independent consultant. So they said, well, we can't afford you. So that's when I really got the bug bitten as an entrepreneur to found MetaOps back in 2002. And, initially as management consulting company doing Lean Six Sigma supply chain, I got very active in thought leadership, traveling the country's public speaking engagements to help organizations understand operational excellence, how to apply in any situation. Digitization, even in those days, is a big deal. And back in 2012, we created the MetaExperts brand. And MetaExperts is a brand we created and is now registered trademark. So we existed long before Meta was even thinking about that name. And this notion that, on-demand experts that are people like me that kind of grew up in the industry, that people can plug into as experts to help them go get important things done, part-time, full-time resources. And that's a company that my wife and I operate together. She's the president and I'm the
Nice.
CEO, and we kind of have this 1-2 punch, for the leadership of the organization. And, one of the things that I continue to be very involved with is I have my own podcast called Metapod. You go to metaexperts.com, you'll find a button right there at the top for Metapod. And in my podcast, which according to the data is supposed to be top 30 in North America for a B2B podcast,
Congrats.
it's been quite a journey, is we focus on the three things. I bring in thought leaders to talk about one of three things or all three. The forever labor shortage challenge, right? For manufacturers in particular, or anybody that needs people to execute in North America, we have a real problem with access to people to get things done. The second is digitization and digital transformation, the digitization of work, immense challenge for organizations. And then third is we just got to learn to do more with less. And that's where operational excellence and things like that come in. So I've had the joy to record quite a number of episodes with thought leaders from around the world who have very specific expertise in those topics. So I've gotten to learn a lot, as you might imagine, over the last couple of years, listening to these experts that have been there and done that, talk about how it actually works. So I'm very engaged in thought leadership. And that kind of takes us to what we do as an organization, right? This whole notion of MetaOps and MetaExperts around access to really smart people to help solve those really difficult business problems. And we tend to focus in on, manufacturing and supply chain centric organizations with challenges around digital transformation, which of course is what Metapod's all about. And with our 1,200 Meta experts, we're able to provide a lot of bandwidth and a lot of scale for organizations that need help in literally any U.S. states and 20 plus countries. We did focus, just to be clear, for many years, mainly on larger organizations as customers, but recently we've expanded and have beginning to offer small business support. This is for small SMB or small, medium business size organizations. And we're offering a free workshop series. We actually have our first live event in Metro Detroit coming up on February 17th. And in those workshops, and this is strictly giving back here a little bit, giving organizations that aren't so big a crack at what the big guys do successfully, to help leaders uncover what's holding them back for growing their businesses, identify where their next big gains might come from, and then aligning their team around those clear priorities and help them zero in on and sharpen their execution, and actually leave that 3-hour workshop with a roadmap and some priorities and even a charter to kind of go after that first immediate implementation project. So for what it's worth, if this episode airs in time, we have a couple of open seats, may still have a couple of open seats for the February 17th. And then the virtual workshops start in March 2026 and more live workshops in Michigan. So get to that on our website. If you go to metaexperts.com, so it's It's https://metaexperts.com/free-leadership-alignment-workshop with a final slash. That gets you there. And I think, Matt, you'll include that link.
Yes, we'll make sure to include that link as well in the description, so it's easier to find. Fantastic. So if you brought the keyword digital transformation a lot already in the conversation, if you could essentially, for those who are curious about it, break it down. What does it entail? What does digital transformation entail? Does it mean to be visible online? Does it mean that certain processes are digitalized as well? As I've mentioned earlier, the SOPs. Is it strictly for client acquisition? Is it for marketing, for management operations? What do you mean by saying digital transformation, since this is such a big topic nowadays?
It is. We could spend a good hour about just on that alone. And maybe we come back and we do that in another episode. But digital transformation conceptually affects everything about how we operate our business. I mentioned, that online digital transformation awareness program that I helped architect. It's how we go to market, who we're selling to, how we sell to them, how we bring products to market, how we develop our products, how do we reach out and communicate, get our sales from asset application and digital transformation. But then as you move down through it, functionally, you said, okay, well, now I have to actually, have a building, and I need equipment, and I need material, and I need machines and people. I have all that coming into play. You have all the front and back office stuff, HR systems, accounts payable, receivable, it goes on, right? ERP systems taken to the next level. And then you've got all of the quality systems, managing HR all the way out through, how we actually provide services and, the end of life cycle use of products, the back, I'll call it reverse supply chain, and all the things around EHS for right environmental EHS. So it's environmental. Always get tripped up on that, right?
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, so it's the social responsibility, right? The mandates around being socially responsible, all those things, big plays there as well. So, to cut to the chase of it, there's no part of the end-to-end value stream that an organization is involved with and the functions they require to operate that is not being impacted in a meaningful way around some form of digital transformation.
There's a lot of parts, as you've mentioned, a lot of steps that are needed to make it happen. So obviously it's not something that you can do overnight or even over a span of a few days. What are the biggest mistakes that you've seen so far when manufacturers and companies you work with do when it comes to even approaching that task, that transformation?
Well, here's the advice I give, and I'm actually working with an organization that's sweating that right now. They came to me last year and said, we're about to drop $2 million on software and services to buy some digitization tools for our product lifecycle management process, right? So this is the process you use to quote, win business, engineer, design a product, put it in production, start producing it at rate, and then providing end of life cycle support, like repair parts, things like that, the whole life cycle of the product. Yeah. So we're dropping a couple $1 million on this year, plus a couple of million a year, probably for several years to come. What's the ROI? We're doing that. So the answer for them is the same for any of us. It really starts with, we've got to understand our processes. And so if you're not familiar with this term called business process management, it's about people, process, and technology. But then inside of that, there's definition of processes. So, D. Edwards Deming, one of the great fathers of quality, and, seen as one of the main leaders that helped define what we would call operational excellence at Lean Six Sigma today, said, if you can't describe what you're doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing. All right. So how do you describe something as a process? You need to map it somehow, right? List of activities, lane map, process maps, value stream maps, lots of different techniques, but you're going to get it into some form. You can actually describe it as a step-by-step process, right? No matter what it is we do, whether it's hiring people, billings, collections, making something, designing something, everything has a process, right? That's what businesses do. That's what we get paid to do, is perform a process that somebody wants to pay for. Business is all about. And here's the trick. You have to put enough data to it and be able to use a filter to say, okay, here's the 100 things we're doing in the process, but which 20 of those actually matter? Okay. So that comes back to, what are we solving for? What is it we need to accomplish as a business? If we're trying to grow our business, so just bear with me here. I'll get there. What's the priority? What's the kind of problem we're solving for as a business? Let's just pretend that it's growth. Say, great. What's keeping us from growth? Is it speed to market? Are our costs too high? Is our quality too low? What does good look like? Do we need to provide a better customer experience when they do business with us? We got to define some kind of a problem. And that dictates the granularity and the detail of the data you need. And then basically you go through the steps of the process that are involved with delivering whatever it is you do, filtered down by the problem we're solving for. And you collect data and understand cost, time, money, first time quality capability, pain points, headaches, customer voice of customer issues, whatever. You map those to them, which put values to them. Usually it's around speed, cost, quality, customer experience, sources, but they're measurable in some way. And then you say, great, so now let's do what's called a Pareto analysis and identify which steps actually matter to the outcome we're looking for. Here's what you'll learn if you have the data to do it. Is you can say, okay, there's 100 steps here, but these 20 are 80% of the opportunity for improving our performance with respect to what we're solving for. Now we can say, great, now we can really zero in on those and say, okay, of those 20, which of these lend themselves to business process reengineering? Which of these lend themselves to digitization and digital transformation? Which of these lend themselves to just good process reengineering, just rethinking why are we doing it that way, challenging business rules, reinventing how we do the process altogether if we can. There's design thinking and other sorts of tools out there to do that. And that's where the magic comes. If you're going to, spend time and money using all the big thing, the portfolio of all the possible tools, including AI, to fix something, you've got to have a business case. It's got to be very outcome focused, right? So my challenge is always, so what's the benefit of this? I said, well, trust us, life can be better. I said, sorry. Another thing that Demi said, this is really important. In God we trust. All others bring data.
Yes.
And that would be my challenge, right? Show me the data. But if I'm going to spend that time and money, like digital transformation, whatever it may be, what's the outcome we actually get? And show me exactly what the benefit's going to be. Where are we going to be faster, better, cheaper, whatever that we're trying to accomplish, and be very, very laser focused. So to answer your question, the application of digitization, digital tools, whatever you may choose to define it as, has to be a business outcome basis, and you have to have a process and a good understanding of that process with a way to measure it first. Otherwise, you're just spray and pray, because I cringe. Oh, we've been training all of our employees how to use AI, so magically we're going to be a better company. Okay, tell me how that.
Well, one challenge that I see here happening is that it might be difficult when you're inside of an organization. You grow it from you're with the company, you started a company, maybe you founded it or you're co-owner. It might be difficult to look at the processes from a third party perspective to actually observe what needs to identify those essentially gaps within the system, and maybe 20 parts that could be removed because they're redundant, they're not needed, or they're slowing down the process, or they're lowering the quality, or they're maybe causing some problems down the road when the product is already, or service is already delivered, or product is manufactured. So I think that's that. Have you, maybe that's the question to you? Have you seen it in your history so far, where founders or companies, operators, CEOs were challenged with that? They couldn't figure out a warrior capacity bandwidth to actually observe those processes, look at them from a third party perspective, and come up with something constructive to solve those problems that you've mentioned.
Right. If capabilities are important, then maybe a better route is, somebody that's actually been there and done that and been through the execution several cycles that can lean in and actually work with you, right? Not do it to you, but do it with you and actually empower your organization. So I just described, that example with the company was dropping a couple $1 million, trying to understand the impact on $25 million of overhead spend.
Wow.
And at the end of that, we were able to say, hey, you're probably looking at a 40% productivity gain across that $25 million spend, combination of the digital transformation and the basic process improvement stuff, re-engineering business rules, just rethinking how we were doing things with solving for the problem. But at the end of the day, I didn't do all the analysis. I actually sat with their leadership team, guided and coached them on how to actually build that data and to do the analysis. So I'm actually talking to them tomorrow, and I'm headed back out up there to see them next week, and they're going to want some more of that.
I love that. Yes, I'm curious to hear the outcome of that as well. Which leads us to the next point in our conversation prior to recording. You've mentioned something that is dear to my heart as well, a famous Japanese philosophy called Kaizen, doing small incremental changes, which based on what you said, learning by doing taps perfectly into this, because you don't have to big task or one big goal that you want to accomplish, you have to break it down to smaller chunks of tasks instead of just approaching it one big goal right away. How does it fit into your what you do essentially, what the services that you provide for your clients?
Well, again, we got to unpack that a little bit. So, Kaizen is a heavily used word with many different possible definitions, right? So, if we step back from it, Kaizen is a breakdown, just basically change for the better. Okay. So Kaizen, change for the better. Okay. So, depending on your orientation and how you're exposed to Kaizen, you may have this vision of, what that's supposed to be. And the long and short of it, there's 100 different ways to go at doing Kaizen, from very, very minute, minuscule, right? Just a basic process, plan, do, check, act, very narrow scope, very small application, done every day as part of a standing team that's charged with managing a process. Running through little mini cycles of continuous improvement. That's Kaizen, right? The process I just went through with this $1 billion plus company, I'm going to see next week, that whole plan of, that whole process of where to prioritize, why to prioritize, and getting at where we need to focus first is a form of Kaizen. I would call that an enterprise level Kaizen, right? To really get focused on where we need to be. But what's going to spawn out of that is, if you move into the next step, is okay, now let's actually get into deep dive brainstorming and come up with an entire portfolio of projects that we need to implement to actually realize that 40% delta in total productivity across all of our overhead. Oh, by the way, we can't hire engineers for love nor money. So we get to grow 40, 50% without having to hire more people. And that's the big payoff of that organization is, okay, let's work out that portfolio of projects. Well, a certain percentage of those projects will be Kaizen based. So, okay, we need to reinvent how we do crash testing, for example. Let's make sure we're making parts that go into the body of an automobile. You have very rigorous standards for crash testing that you have to meet. Well, you've got to that's a whole process. And you recognize it's taking too long, it costs too much, blah, blah, blah. You have an entire activity around just what can we do to optimize crash testing, right? So you're getting down now a level of saying this is a very specific problem solving activity, a form of Kaizen, where we're solving for a very specific outcome. We need to do crash testing in half the time at half the cost, with no compromise of the quality and the compliance to standards, right? That's the problem statement. And then we structure the Kaizen activity, pull in the right people, get really clear about the problem, the scope, think down through, this is where Six Sigma and the little SIPOC diagram comes in. Like, who are the suppliers? What are the inputs? What's the process? What are the outputs? Who are the customers for this? Making sure we understand that. And then very carefully doing some form of value stream mapping and break that down, maybe even to the key click level of what's going on and who's doing what, right? And then you could uncover inside of that. By the way, you should map in what are all the sources of data and information you use for crash testing, right? You got your product lifecycle management system, you got Excel spreadsheets, you have email, you have 20 different sources of data and information you'd use during the crash testing cycle. What are those? How do those map to the process? Are there opportunities to streamline or integrate those? Could we use AI to do some of those steps? Blah, 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 blah. That's where we really start to dive down, from a form of Kaizen is basically a structured process to define a problem, put the right people in the room, ideate, prioritize, boil out the 20% of the actions where 80% of the benefits come from, categorize those, and move down to specific secondary levels of Kaizen, where you're solving for exactly how to fix that one assigned mini project. So inside of crash testing, you could have 20 different projects to speed up that crash testing and reduce the cost and remain compliant. There could be 20 different little mini projects in there. So it's just a process, right? So think about Kaizen as simply a structured approach. It could be very high level at the enterprise level, right? Looking at big processes, right? Just to get focused, you can go all the way down to how we're handling that telephone call. And I've done that. I work with contact centers where we're doing, tech support to keep computers running. You're right down to the key click practically. Where all the steps from customers calling saying, my computer won't run, I need to restart it or reset the password or whatever to the problem resolved. That only takes hopefully only a couple, 3 minutes. There might be 10 or 12 steps in there. By the way, we don't always succeed. So why are we not succeeding? It goes on and on and on. But just remember that it's a structured process. There's no one best way to do it. It really is defined by the nature of the problem we're solving for and the scope from an organizational impact perspective and, the amount of rigor and details required to get to the solution. If it's involving how we land airplanes, I think it better be pretty detailed and exact. because it needs to be
Yeah.
Six Sigma or better. If we're talking about a better customer experience for a contact center call, a little less excruciating and a few more mistakes can be okay as long as it's within, a reasonable amount because you got people doing things and people are only 80% effective anyway. 85% human inspection is about, effectiveness is about all you can expect. So you're never going to get perfection out of a process that a human is involved with at any real level. It's just not going to happen, right? That's why you have to be careful about what you're solving for and what you're moving to. If absolute perfection is required, that's where, Six Sigma rigor really comes into play. And that's totally eliminating it, totally eliminating the opportunity for human error, maximizing the application of technologies like AI, for example, so that you can just get it right the first time, every time, when it's absolutely crucial to do that. If you think about landing aircraft right the first time, the way they do that is redundancies and backup systems and all kinds of analytics. You do a lot of what's called reliability centered maintenance programs so that they can understand and maintain that all the equipment involved with landing an aircraft safely the first time, every time, and building in the checks and balances to make sure they don't deteriorate, right, get worn out too fast, get replaced and fixed. You have leading indicators, you're heading toward a failure mode. Well, all of that's form of Kaizen at some level.
That's true. And I could listen to one forever. It sounds like all the books that I love reading or love rereading, such as Good to Great, Kaizen, In Search of Excellence is another great book. I'm pretty sure you're familiar with. And it sounds like all of these books you've been actually implementing for or and testing for the last decades. And my next question to you, since this is the last shift you described earlier in our conversation, AI, artificial intelligence, there's obviously a huge hype all over from every sorts of life, every industry out there. Do you actually see it in your world, in your industry, being implemented, replacing or reducing the headcounts at companies significantly? Where do you see AI over the next 5 to 10 years within those organizations?
Okay, you're not going to like the answer. It's going to depend. So we think about end-to-end business processes in almost every organization. Let's just take a manufacturer, right? You've got core value stream: design, make, build, deliver, install, support aftermarket lifecycle, right? There's all those series of steps there. But then you've got the business processes support that: hiring, accounting, purchasing, supply chain management. We've got, right? Then you can go down through quality management, all of your compliance requirements to be an employer, all of that stuff. So what the answer is, it depends on the process and if it natively lends itself to applying AI to solve the problems. Okay.
Mhm.
So for intrinsic things where you need a person involved with doing it, like taking part A and fitting it to part B, I don't think our AI is going to do that for us anytime soon. I watch this carefully and, I think you're going to see some impact. Okay. But here's the thing that I heard, so I think it's Jeff Imel. He was one of the CEOs of General Electric at one point. And I was at the orchestral event in Texas in October, and he was on the stage. And context of that whole get together was automation in procurement, right? So it's AI, gaming based theory used to use markets to quickly drive cost out for large organizations with a large spend, leveraging, the workforce and purchasing and being able to get a whole lot more done with the people you have with respect to, managing suppliers and maintaining their cost controls. And basically, the question that came up is, and so here's what Jeff said. He says, listen, AI is not going to take your job. People using AI will take your job. So that's the shift, right? So that's the big challenge to organizations is definitely there's some opportunities, but it's going to depend on the process. And it's going to be almost down to the actual step level inside process. And this is where the laser precision about applying AI has to come. And then using it as the enabler, right, to accelerate processes. Let me give you an example. And then Derek Browning, he works for a little company called Uber Freight, or Uber, right? We have a little company that does freight. And we talked about logistics. So he used a great example. He was a guest on one of my podcasts. He used this great example. When you get the phone call from a customer and says, I've got a pallet of freight at this little town in Timbuktu, and I need that picked up and delivered to my customer 1,000 miles away tomorrow. Well, there's 150 carriers to pick from. So a human being has to sit there and go, okay, I have to go research that and figure all that out. Well, a better solution is you've got AI tools and agents, right? A series of agents that are continually monitoring those geographies, which carriers are involved, where's their equipment actually located, what's their current pricing picture, blah, 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 and actually gather all that data that could take a human being 45 minutes to sift through and have it for them in 45 seconds. But then the human being, right? Got human in the loop here. That's kind of the terminology. Then a human being looks at that, sits back from it and says, okay, does that make sense? And then using that to say, okay, let's chase down these three carriers and validate their availability, pickup, and cost, and then make the decision. So what could have taken 20, 30, 45 minutes to make a good decision on, you can do in 2 minutes. Well, that's a massive productivity gain for a logistics company. And that's been happening all along. I had the joy to spend some time with one of the guys that developed AI. He's been doing this for 20 years. He's a data scientist. And he starts talking about the O's and the zeros and all the things you go through to construct the data to actually give AI its capability. My eyes roll back in my head really fast. I mean, this guy's Mensa smart, blah, blah, blah. There's really not a lot new about AI. It's just becoming more widely applied, right?
Sure.
And I've had somebody say something important to me, really, the other day. It's really important. David Schultz. He says, look, this whole space about AI and digitalization is moving very quickly. He says, in fact, when you start to hear about something new that's available that we can go tap into, it's probably already mature or even in decline.
That's a good point. Yes.
Which leads us back to, can we be one and done with digital transformation? No. Or leveraging AI? No. It's an endless process of iteration and reinvention. It's continuous and unending. So it's a different world. We're a different
And
place now than we ever used to be.
I agree with you. And that reminds me of that interview I heard from the CEO of NVIDIA that in which he mentioned that they've been using AI for 15 to 20 years. It's nothing new. It didn't really change anything. Obviously, it became popular for the rest of the population and accessible, but not popular only, but also accessible for
Right.
the rest of the population. That's how why there's so much news about it, and obviously everyone talks about it everywhere in the world. So that's definitely new for most of the people, but not for those organizations. And like you said, if you can have human in the loop, I love that phrase. I had to write it down. Human in the loop, speeding up their processes and actually taking away from their thinking for sitting down and thinking for an hour or two and trying to find complex solutions and research and all of that. If that can be done within seconds with AI, but still keep the human in the loop, I think that's going to create a better customer experience overall and higher quality.
And that is real. And yes, there's probably some workforce reductions, but basically, let's face it, certain activities are going to become obsolete because it's
Indeed.
readily automated. Picking up my garbage can, getting it into the truck isn't going away. So we need, that's not going away. So we're still going to need that, right? So where we need people physically involved and that human decision is required, we're not going to get a lot out of it. We're just not. It really comes down to
Definitely.
very surgical application at the step level where it actually makes a difference.
So don't give up. For those who listen, do not give up on learning and mastering the critical thinking part of the brain yet. Don't source it out to AI. Do the mundane work and develop that skill. Continue to develop that skill. The last part of the conversation, the last questions is I like to call a little bit more philosophical. So the first question I have for you was, what if you look back at those years in the industry, what gives you most fulfillment in what you do? Traded. What gives you the
You
most
mean,
fulfillment?
you mean fulfillment for me personally or for my company
Yes.
or for my
For,
customers or what?
no, for you personally.
For me personally. Well, it kind of changes over time, but at the end of the day, it's very enjoyable to see the lights come on, right? For people to, I'm beginning to get it, right? It's really fulfilling when people feel empowered, right? And they're grateful for it doesn't have to be this bad.
Mm,
Right. And I've learned something that helps make me, my company, my community, my contribution to the world a better thing. I guess that's the fulfillment is recognizing that, what I do and how I do it does make a difference in the lives of the people that I'm able to impact. And I'd like to think the world's a little better place.
love that. Yes, that question always gives me some good answers. I always hear some good answers because there's in every organization, every company, whatever service you provide or products you provide, there's always something that impacts obviously people that use your services or products in a positive way, hopefully in a positive way, and that is usually giving all of those entrepreneurs that I've interviewed, had an honor to interview so far, that fulfillment that, hey, we're actually making an impact. It left someone in a better shape or condition, whether it's their organization or them personally. That's always what I love to hear. I love hearing. Next question. If you had an opportunity to sit across the table from Ron, you started everything so early. You started working right after high school, and you got married right after high school or on high school. So if you had an opportunity to sit across the table from Ron, who's just starting out, what piece of advice would you leave him with?
Wow. I've thought about that often, right? I definitely would have gone to college right out of high school. I wouldn't have waited until I was in my early 20s before even starting going to college.
Really?
17 years of night school to eventually, I merged
Yeah.
with an undergrad in management and organizational development. So I definitely would have, taken it more seriously about getting a formal education. I think I would have moved more quickly in my career to achieve, some of the things I have. I think I would have beaten that curve a little bit and been able to make a bigger difference for more people a little quicker.
Hmm. Interesting. That's a good point. I have a follow up question to that. Now, the term YouTube University is very popular. I hear so many interesting applications of that. Of this YouTube University, like learning new languages by listening to podcasts in different language, or learning a certain skills at the age of 10. I've shared so many interesting stories. Do you think that online education is also going to help accelerate your career in some certain ways, or do you still recommend going the traditional way of committing 3 5 years of your life to just studying the traditional way?
You're not going to like my answer. It's situational, right? It comes down to a personal decision by the individual. Sit down, really think about what it is that they want to do with themselves, right?
Mm,
Where do they want to be? Where am I? What am I doing? What's my life look like? Who am I? Okay. Then kind of back up from that, say, so from an education perspective, what gets me there? Okay. So the challenge is online education will never replace traditional in-person stuff for a couple of reasons. One is adults learn best by doing, and typically online learning does not incorporate doing things. So I'm a big advocate of for adults to learn how to do something better or differently is a very experiential thing. There's a limit to how much of that you can do in a virtual environment. And so that's one element. Okay. Here's the other element that's crucial. And I'm starting to hear this a lot more, with these younger generations coming up that don't know what the world looks like without a cell phone in your hand, right? Cell phones didn't exist when I went into the workforce. Only the uber wealthy actually had a car phone in the 1980s, right? I grew up and was, working in industry at that point, including, Disney and some other cool companies. And those technologies didn't exist. So what's happening is we've got this phenomena as we're moving into this next couple of decades of whole generations coming up without the interpersonal skills, the abilities to talk with people. Well, there's going to be a massive shortage of good salespeople going forward. People have the ability to just not be afraid to just talk with somebody.
yeah.
So I'm very concerned that as a society, we need to be thinking about our public-private partnerships, things we're doing to cultivate the interpersonal skills that people are going to need to have to be successful in the future. Because if you don't have the interpersonal skills, you're not able to express, not able to relate, you're not able to communicate effectively. It's hard for you to influence people and make a difference in their lives if that's the career you've chosen without learning those sorts of skills. You're not going to get those online. I'm sorry. It's this very experiential. That's where traditional college is not going away. Mentorship program, the big believer in mentorship programs. As we bring people into the workforce, we should have very structured mentorship programs to pair them up with people that are at the place they want to be, to coach, mentor them, and help them learn. I'll call it the soft skills, interpersonal skills required to be able to interact in society, lead groups of people, have difficult conversations. We're going to continue to have difficult conversations, and having those conversations is a learned skill. Yeah, maybe I'm born with the gift for that. Okay. But I also have invested a lot of time and money in how to be a really good public speaker, how to be a great facilitator, how to present information to people in a way they can grasp it, how to bring people along, right? Do stuff with them as opposed to them. I grant you, in my earlier years, I had some pretty hard edges, and I still do as far as that goes. But I did learn the real value of honoring people and really learning how to meet people where they are, communicate with them on the basis they need, meet them where they are, and then help take them where they need to go.
Great advice. I have a few things to share here. So first of all, the addiction behind the devices, it's definitely real for we have a 1-year-old in the house and now, and we're blessed to spend a lot of time with her. And the moment she grabbed that phone, it literally took. She has no idea what it is, but the moment she grabbed it, after probably a couple, maybe a day or two has gone by, she almost became addicted to it. So now we have to just hide. Everyone who comes into the house, we ask them to hide their phones, not take them out, because she immediately wants to see it. And I have no idea how this even worked, but when I saw it, it really shook me. So that's the first story. I agree with you here, and I do like your answer there because it was quite thought provoking and it's maybe even inspiring, I shall say. The second thought is I remember firsthand seeing and actually even observing from a third person perspective a downfall of a company that was employing 80 to 90 people back in Europe. And the downfall started happening because the founder profoundly refused to approach any sort of digitalization, which first step was to implement implement phones into their employees, because you cannot if your employees go out in the field and you can't communicate with them, versus all other companies have mobile phones now and they can just call someone and get an answer immediately, you are going to lose out. Something simple as that. But I've observed that, so I agree with you there that it's very important to observe with caution what's happening in the market with all those new tools that are happening, but definitely do not just completely block it and say that, hey, it's not going to work for us, it's not going to work for others, it's not something we should have in our company, in our organization. So
Yep,
very
you're right
valid.
about that. It kind of brings me back to the advice of to leaders. Somebody wants to spend time and money looking at digitalization. Say, great, show me the ROI, show
Yes.
me the business case. What is the clear business outcome? And let's work from that. So in the case of the company we talked about, the business outcome was to be more competitive, right?
Mhm.
Because we have an existential threat that if we don't morph and change as fast as our competitors are, we can't compete.
Yes, absolutely.
So now
Yes,
we got to
someone.
solve for the specific problems, right? And unfortunately, the owners of the organization didn't recognize that they had an existential threat they had to deal with, unfortunately.
Yes, and that was obviously had devastating results that impacted so many lives. And that's one thing about entrepreneurship. We all should respect that they provide food and shelter for so many families often, and that's very important to make sure that they stay afloat and continue to grow. And yeah, being competitive is a big part of it, because the downfalls can happen very quickly if you stop becoming competitive in the market.
We talk about these free workshops that we're putting on that I offer to the audience. And the process is this ties exactly to what you're saying here, Matt, is, in this 3-hour workshop is where are we? Where do we need to go? What does good look like for this organization? Right? As the owner, the entrepreneur, whoever's responsibility for the total company. And then where are we going to play and how are we going to win? Right? We got to get laser focused on the markets, the customers, offers, what it is we're doing that adds value. Then we got to work through, okay, what are the top constraints? What are those key few actions to attack the constraints to keep us from being successful in winning in the marketplace? And then we better be good at some kind of charter, clear action plan, some Kaizen, if you will, with those clear accountabilities, the measures, and a solid work breakdown structure to support go getting in that done. But you know what? You can't boil the ocean here. Pick your battles, right? Go after things that actually matter, that drive a real business outcome. Learn, fail, learn, succeed.
And the workshop you said is going to be the first workshop is in person, February 17th, correct? And then you
Yep.
mentioned there's one more in March that will be held online. Is that remember it correctly?
Yep. So if you happen to go out to the webpage with the link, you'll see there's some dates and stuff you could pre-select.
Yes, and I highly encourage everyone to participate. These exercises are very much needed. There's a reason why reducing the chaos in the organization can help you continue to grow for the next decades to come. So listen to the advice of Ron, and I'm looking forward to seeing the outcomes and positive feedback from it already. Ron, thank you so much for stopping by and spending that power hour with me and educating the audience and us all here. Based on your experience, it was an absolute honor and pleasure to have you on the podcast. And I'm looking forward to staying connected and in touch and hopefully bring you back on in the next couple of months to come.
I'd be honored to do that.
Thank you, Ron.